This episode of the Oh No 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 podcast is sponsored by Dynamic Industrial Services, the rope access specialists. Every week we talk about the Rovers' latest attempts to climb the SPFL ladder, but sometimes even a ladder won't reach. DIS are specialists in working at height, offering maintenance, inspection, repair and more, right across Scotland. So if you need a rope access specialist and you want a premiership service, visit dynamicindustrialservices.co.uk to find out more. Hello and welcome back to the Oh No 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 podcast, where tonight we are back and we are gearing up for the League Cup. I'm your host, Robbie Weir, and tonight I'm delighted to be joined by a man that we can safely say is Jordan Peterson's worst nightmare, Callum Blythe. How you doing, Callum?
Can't complain about me not making my bed if it's not here.
That's going to be a real tough one for the audio listeners on Spotify that have just no idea that your bed was messy up until this point. So the YouTube viewers are, I'm sure, delighted by this, that the OCD's not been sent, although a few of those slats might be off. We're also joined by everyone's favourite man of 1,000 languages. A couple of nice kits there in the background that I'm sure you're about to tell us about. Leslie, how you doing?
I'm fantastic. I'm on for the second time in a few days. I'm not sure how much value I'm going to add, but I'm here. Behind me, for those of you who are on YouTube, we've got a couple of Spanish kits for absolutely no reason at all. So we've got a La Palma shirt, which was the one that they had in the last season when Paquita was there. And then we've got a Real Valladolid shirt worn by Shoji Joe, the first Japanese player to play in La Liga. And he had issues with his ligaments, and because we've got Louis Vaughan playing for the Rovers, I thought that was a nice connection. So 2 Rovers connections to 2 Spanish shirts. No other reason why I would have anything to do with Spain behind me.
Got to say, I'm terrified. I'm terrified, and I know that Bob the Pledge is listening to this right now. Bob, don't test your luck, even, shall we say? And then a late addition to the podcast tonight. He's came through clutch and decided to come back and join us. Managed to put his other commitments to the side. Mr. Duncan Cameron, how are you, Duncan?
I'm very well, mate. Delighted to be here. Delighted to be back for our first full season. Hopefully, as long as we don't go defunct halfway through.
Well, you know, it's wouldn't be the first time that's happened in Scottish football, I'm sure. So yeah, we are back, and we'll start off with the main talking point of this evening, which was the arrival announcement of the new away kit. Now, there have been a few rumours swelling about. I could see Leslie again. Come on, Leslie, he's shown off his kits now. The 2 blue bands is back, the 2 hoops. So just initially, what were your thoughts seeing that come back through there, Leslie?
It's a very simple, clean design, but it works so well. I'm going to stick my neck out and say that this incarnation of the white and the 2 blue hoops was actually better than the one that we won the Challenge Cup in. Something the way Joma have done it, the execution of it is just really, really neat. And it's an absolute cracker. I think the cool kids would call it a banger.
Well, we'll take that. I've got to be honest, I'd heard sort of rumours that we were going back to the white with 2 hoops, and I was a bit cynical about it, because, you know, you can visit the well sometimes a bit too much with these things, but, you know, you wait and see what happens, and then straight away I was immediately like, that is an absolute belter of a kit. I'm more than happy to be disproven wrong, and any doubts have been dissuaded. So, yeah, Duncan, for you, what were your thoughts on the new kit?
Well, as one of the cool kids, I think it's a banger. Definitely, just very, very impressed. I was a little bit like you in terms of when it was rumoured. I think it's got kind of 2 things for me. One, it's not the most sort of eye-catching of designs as a concept. It's a white jersey with 2 blue hoops on it. You think, right, okay, fair enough. And the other thing for me, to go back to what you're saying about the Ramsden's one not being necessarily the best. I thought the sponsor detracted from that a little bit. And again, having not seen it, you think if you're going to have a front of shirt sponsor, it's going to take up space where the main kind of feature of the shirt is. But actually, that one I think is possibly as good as you could get for a shirt like that. Just it looks excellent. We spoke before about away kits, and you can kind of, do you want to go mad with them, or do you want to have a really good story behind them, like last year's? Do you want to really lean into the heritage? And I think this one obviously does lean into heritage, but also I think it's a really, really good looking jersey, which obviously helps. So, big round of applause from me for the design team.
Speaking of new jerseys, Callum, I just want to ask you, just with the new home kit, I know that sort of the reaction to that had maybe been a bit muted compared to what it's been like with the away kit. So now that you've seen that in the flesh, what were your thoughts about that? Were you a fan of the home kit as well? Or?
I thought the home kit is fine. Like, it's nothing. Like, it's not bad, but it's nothing special. I thought it's a slight downgrade on last season's kit, but who knows? It might grow on me, it might not. But the new away kit is a stunner. It's an excellent kit. I love it. I think as Duncan was saying, I had the fear where it's like with some of these old designs, they were made before you had front of shirt sponsors, so sometimes it doesn't work, but they've made it work.
Yeah, I think in particular with this new away kit, it looks really, really sleek with the sponsor's logo on the front, and it works really well. I think it's very hard because the club has created a rod for their own back in a way with the Las Palmas kit from last season, because that was so well received and it kind of went low-key viral. And to have a kit that was doing so well in a place outside of Scotland and Kirkcaldy in general is just a bit unheard of. But yeah, they did create a bit of a rod for their own back, and kits are never an easy thing to do. It's not something that I envy, because you're always going to get someone out there that's got a gripe or a complaint, because we're football fans and that's in our nature. But the club have done really well, and I think it's two at minimal solid efforts, and the away kit I'm hopeful will go down as one that can live long in the memory, much in the way that the Ramsden's Cup kit became kind of ingrained in our folklore, really, and the story behind it. So yeah, that was announced this evening, and you'll have the third kit as well coming for the Club 1883 fans. So club are going to be filling their boots with the financials. I know, saw Ian Latto already slapping down his card earlier, which was fantastic. The other little talking point that we had coming through over the last few days was the signing of Jake Nicholson, so we'll just touch on that a bit, just very briefly. So Duncan, do you think it's a positive to sort of see the pathway in the community sort of bearing a bit of fruit there and sort of showing that local route?
Yes, 100%. I think it's very important. It's obviously a slightly odd situation, a slightly odd scenario, where you've got the Raith Rovers Community Foundation and Raith Rovers Football Club, but they are two separate entities, and I think everybody's at pains to make that clear, I suspect, because there are, charitable funding matters that play into all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, you really do want to have that. You want to have it as a pathway and a progression, and you want the kids especially who are in the community foundation to have that thought in their heads when they're playing. And when they do, saw a few people over the summer kind of posting photos with kids who are like 10, 11 years old, and they're signing photos at the big desk with John Potter, and you want that to feel like that's one big thing, and that's like, in theory, you could be sat at this desk 3 or 4 times, and the last time Ian Murray's in the room as well. And if Jake Nicholson's just the first in what should hopefully become, a progressive, longer line, then fantastic, and I'm all for it.
I think it's really nice in terms of seeing, especially the content that they put out during the summer. You've consistently got content coming out from the Community Foundation about the work that they do, both at Starks Park, and then you look at the summer sessions that they do at places like Burnt Island as well. So it's great to see stuff like, for instance, where the parents would get to meet John Potter and he would explain about what the club are trying to implement and things along those lines. So yeah, Leslie, what did you make of the signing, and just in general, just the sort of opportunities that are being given through the Community Foundation?
can only echo what Duncan said. I was delighted to see Jake being given a deal. And I think more than anything else, it's just seeing that pathway from when you come into the community foundation at whatever age and when you start playing, right the way up to being able to actually go into the club. And just to bring up some old ground, because I want to be salty about this for a minute, I think that's one of the great things about having so much of a visible presence in Starks Park. You know, you've got this very clear link and this very visible presence. Like, you start playing for the community foundation on the artificial surfaces, do a bit of your training and things at Starks. Then there's a nice narrative that you then become part of the senior team as well. When you get some of the big teams like, oh, we're no sharing our money. If you want to grow, you should do the same as us and then make money. And then we go and put Astro down, and then we get teams in. They're like, oh, no, not like that, not like that. We didn't mean like that. We don't want we don't want teams up here who rely on community stuff for money. So I think it's fantastic to see somebody coming through, doing all their development on the surface that we have at Starks, and then coming up to the team. I mean, I'd be surprised, I have to say, if we see him playing a lot. I suspect it might be a bit like Callum Hanna last season, that we'll have him in the squad, travelling with the squad, getting the experience of seeing how guys like Paul Hanlon, Ewan Murray train week in, week out, and then we might see him out on loan at some point. But no, just delighted to have him, and delighted, as I say, to have that continuity from the community foundation right up to the first team.
Yeah, I think that's very, very valid point. I know that Jake had been in for the last couple of years, he's been sort of getting opportunities to come in terms of stuff like, for instance, bounce games and things like that. Maybe games behind closed doors where fans aren't going to be sort of crying away or making big assumptions. So it's great for that front as well, that it offers an opportunity for the club to point and say, like, yeah, this is an opportunity for you to come in. You might be involved in bounce games, you can get to know some of the players, and then you can sort of try and develop from there, and then potentially there might be a contract for you on the table. So yeah, really, really positive to say. So yeah, I guess we'll turn now to our main order of business. So the League Cup is now upon us. The draw was made back in May. So just to give you a rundown, I'm sure you're listening to our Raith Rovers podcast, so you know the script and who we're playing by now. But if you are living under a rock, we've got firstly a visit to Fourth Bank this Saturday, where we'll play Stirling Albion. That's then followed on the Tuesday by we get a visit from Scott Agnew's Stranraer. So hopefully he's a bit less successful as a manager compared to when he was as a player, continually banging in goals against us. We've got that return trip up to Dingwall the following Saturday, and then we round off the group with a game against Hamilton Accies the Saturday after. I'm just going to start with you, Callum. With the League Cup, I know that Graham Kilgour touched on it in his interview that was done earlier today, the pre-match interview with Ian Murray. The League Cup format obviously changed a good few years ago now, but are you a fan of it in its current format where it's got this group stage? What are your thoughts about it?
I quite like it. It's a bit different. It's sort of... It gives you like two feels where it's like, if you do go through, obviously that's you potentially playing against the teams that are in Europe. So, your big boys, you can get a game against Celtic, Rangers, Hearts, sometimes Hibs and Aberdeen. Not this season, obviously, because they had a shocking Premiership season. But it does also give you some pretty... It gives you like some different away days, when it is seeded. So you do have usually a Premiership team, a Championship team, sometimes another Championship. Sometimes it's two Championship teams, sometimes it's 2 League One, 2 League Two, maybe even one of the high and the low league teams. So it's like those are teams that we won't play very often. So it's like last season we had Annan. I'd never been to Annan, so it was good for that purpose.
It's a great away day, Annan. It really is like one of the best in Scotland, in my opinion.
But also, if you do go out, then you can learn from it, and you could have fans just say, "Oh, it's just a glorified pre-season tournament," which is the excuse that I like to bring up.
I don't think I'd ever verge that far myself. I think, I think you've got a very good point though. I think that for me, I was raging when the draw was made because we were one ball away from playing against Motherwell, who we've not played against since I think about 2007. So I was itching for a trip to Far Park. So to end up having to go up to Dingwall and see that one coming out was very frustrating. And then, as you say, you've you get a wide mix in terms of whether it's bottom end of the SPFL, and then you've got maybe potentially another championship club. I know that we've had that for the last few seasons. So Leslie, just for you, sort of speaking in terms of hypotheticals, do you think it's a benefit to play against a team that are in League Two firstly, or would you prefer playing one of the bigger teams first? What were your sort of thoughts about that?
For me, this League Cup is very different to anything we've had for the past few years, because I think for the first time in a good while, there is actually pressure and expectation on us to get out the group stage. So we've had a good few seasons where we've been coming into it and we've sort of been the third seed. You know, we've either been the League One team or we've been the sort of lower end championship team. This is the first season, I think, probably since the pandemic, where there has been a real expectation on us to get out the group stages. And I think we have to. I think not just because it's going to be the 30th anniversary of the cup win, but also because, you know, financially, getting some of those big ties, going deep in the competition, that's going to be important. It's going to be important for morale as well. So I do think there's a lot of pressure on us, regardless of who we play first. It doesn't help that we're playing Stirling, who, it has been brought to my attention, have a goalkeeper who may have a very small kit and who turns into prime Buffon when we play him, Derek Gaston. It's absolutely a game where we have to go out and win, and we have to treat it as more than a glorified training exercise. I would say we have to approach this with the same mindset as we would a third or fourth round Scottish Cup tie against a lower league team. We've got to treat it as something that where we have to win, we're expected to win, and we should win.
Yeah, I think those are all very fair points. I know that Ian Murray was very, very vocal about that in that interview that I mentioned just before, where he spoke with Graham and they were having a chat, and Ian Murray's like, "I'm never treating this cup as a pre-season tournament like some do, because it's just, there's too much that you can get out of it, especially as a club like Raith Rovers, where you're likely going to be the second favourites if you're doing well in your time." So I think that makes it quite exciting. I do have another point to cover, but I'm going to skip a few questions down because you've referenced that man, that short sleeve goalkeeper. So he's a bit of a marquee signing for Stirling when you look through the business that they have done during the summer, Duncan. What are you expecting frustrations from Derek Gaston to be coming up, and how important do you think he'll be from Stirling?
Yeah, I'm expecting frustration because I find him incredibly frustrating to watch anyway. I just find him a frustrating character, to be fair. I think Blair and I in particular have been quite vocal on this in the past. Just short sleeves, annoying. His kicking action, annoying. And his ability to just continually not concede goals against us is particularly annoying. So, yeah, it will be interesting to see, more so over the course of the season, to be fair, than just on Saturday, how he gets on. Because you would expect him to be, one of the better goalkeepers in League Two. Just having a quick look at who else Stirling Albion have brought in, and it's not exactly, it's not full of stars, is it?
Yeah.
Ricky Waugh, Harry Wright, Cammy McKinley, Harley Ewan, not guys I've ever heard of. Ali Roy's come in from East Kilbride. He seems to be one of these guys who drops in and out of the league 4 or 5 times a season, despite the fact I know that's not possible. It just seems like he's constantly kind of up and down. So, yeah, difficult to know what to make of Stirling Albion, really, with a change in manager and obviously a fair rotation in their squad. I mean, again, with credit to Nary's Toe Poker, who I am looking at right now. I mean, it looks like they have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 or 14 players who've left. And they've brought in maybe 6 or 7.
Yeah, that was one thing that jumped out to me as being quite strange about them when you're looking at their players that they've brought in, and even the players that they have brought in. I know that they're probably waiting for the loan market to come in so they can get younger lads from the likes of Hibs, Hearts, etc. But the players that they have brought in, there's one from like University of Stirling, and that's not to be dismissive. Given, I mean, we've seen James Berry do successful coming up from that level before, and but it's I think it's a lot more difficult, and that has been touched upon, that it's harder to plan because it's the first game of the season. There's less to review in terms of what clubs are like. So yeah,
I think that is one thing to be said about the format of the League Cup. I think it works really well for us. I really like it. I like how quickly you're getting into kind of competitive games and all that kind of stuff, and you've got a chance to progress and playing teams from different levels. If you are the League Two side in a group like that, though, you know that you've almost certainly got no chance of progression. So, like, if you're Stirling Albion, you're looking at this game on Saturday, I don't think you're that bothered about like trying to rush deals through and like, I don't want to wait for a good loan player because I need a guy. Fundamentally, you might get a decent result. Are you going to get the 3 or 4 decent results you really need to get through? Probably not. So I think it's, if you were canvassing, kind of championship fans about how do you feel about this League Cup group stage now we've had it for a while, I think it would be generally quite positive. I don't know that you'd necessarily get the same from the supporters and the players and the managers in kind of League Two and the bottom end.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I think that occasionally you'll see some teams that will perform very well. For instance, Annan did really well. I think it was not last season because we were in the group with us, but the season before that, I think they had like St Johnstone and a couple of other teams, and they just seemed to go on a run that led them into a decent position in the later stages of the League Cup for a club like that, which is a huge effort. I think it does raise probably a bit of a question next, Callum, is that it's a bit similar to the Euros, where because you've got so many games and the way that the format works in terms of teams going through, do you think teams are more liable to, say, for instance, if you're a club that's like a Stirling Albion and you've got a 1-1 draw, for example, and you're reaching that 70-minute mark, you're more likely to shut up, try and get the bonus point for penalties? Do you think it makes it a bit safer for clubs, or do you think that there's still that sort of difficulty and it's still always going to be cup football and it'll create a degree of sort of urgency for clubs?
Maybe. I feel like most teams, like if you're a Stirling Albion, like a League Two team, I think you will go for that bonus, try and get that bonus point. But if you're playing, if you're like a level above, you see the teams a level below, it's like those are the ones that we want to win, those are the ones that we should win. So just like end up throwing the kitchen sink at them. So I doubt they will.
Yeah, it's which is understandable from their perspective. But again, it might be the case that they come out all guns blazing, because you really never know with this competition. And that's one thing I would say as well. I think that a lot of fans at our level, particularly of a club like Raith Rovers, because you've got that, you do to a degree have an added expectation where it'll be, people will go and sort of go to Fourth Bank and they'll think, this is a League Two side, we should be absolutely shunting them out the way, just bullying them, and we should be looking to get a win. And there will be times where that does happen, where you'll go and you'll have a really good result and then you can move on to the next game and look strong. But we only need to look back to last season when it was Albion Rovers who went down to the Lowland League at Starks Park, and they looked very, very well organised for a club at that level. So
Annan as well.
Yeah, Annan as well. Annan's a very good example. So I think that for fans, probably need to be a bit patient as well. Again, everyone's going to have their idea of how games should go, and everyone's got different expectations. We all know that because as football fans, nobody's the same. So yeah, we'll turn our focus now to be more in terms of the Rovers. So starting from back to front, I know we're likely to have Big Kevin goals, but then we move on to the defence, and I think you're really looking at Ian Murray having a whole new conundrum in terms of where we're at compared to where we were before for last season. So yeah, we'll start off classic Championship manager style, going from left to right. Who are you starting for your left back, Leslie?
I think we're going to have to start Stevenson. And the reason I say this is, so as Callum was talking, I was thinking, yeah, I've seen some games where we've looked very wobbly in the last few seasons in the League Cup. And the common factor has often been that we're actually bedding in a lot of new players all at once. So to an extent, we're not having that problem further up the pitch this season. We've pretty much got the same group of guys with a couple of additions that we've had, and that's going to put us in a position of strength. However, the defence is where we do need to get new guys working together and playing together well effectively early. For that reason, I think at the left back position, we're going to give Lewis Stevenson a start on the left of a back four.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me.
You want me to carry on with the rest of the defence?
No, not yet. No, we're absolutely fine. I was just going to say, I think that with Liam Dick, I know that he had a sort of illness bug last week, Ian Murray had hinted upon, so I think that Stevenson's going to be a safe option there. And I'm intrigued to see as to how that will pan out in a competitive game. I've been really impressed with Stevenson going into the friendlies and how his fitness has looked in general and the pace that he's got. I know that a lot of people have sort of, again, they look at him being 36 and they're probably thinking, oh, he's getting onto the tail end of his career. But again, it's a drop down, and that was one that always surprised me was Christophe Berra is probably another example of that, where you looked up a player at the twilight years and people are like, he's done, he's finished. And then he drops down a level and he just looks different class. I'm fully confident the Stevenson deal will be a positive one either way. And I think that as a Kirkcaldy lad, I think that fans are always going to get behind him. Moving towards the central side of things, Duncan, we then enter that territory where we've got a real conundrum as to who we're going to be looking at there. So what are your thoughts on that situation?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say with that is there are no bad options, which is nice. It's nice to have an option here where almost it really doesn't matter which of the combinations you end up with. I'd be happy with all of them, which is nice, it's refreshing. I think Leslie's absolutely spot on in terms of you bring in new guys. I mean, it's not inconceivable by any means at all that the back line on Saturday could be 4 new signings. Could be all 4 of them could be brand new players. But I would agree with Les, I would play Lewis Stevenson as well. And I think one of the big ways you can sort of mitigate that new guy thing is by playing 2 guys who've played 500 games together next to one another, which really helps with the familiarity side of it. I think already, even in the very small sample size that we've had, between Paul Hanlon, Ewan Murray, and Callum Fordyce, you've got 3 centre halves who are all good enough to be playing for a team in the top 4 in the Championship and start every single minute that they're available for. Right? I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. But already, I'd say in the small sample size, I think Paul Hanlon's pushing himself just slightly above the other 2, which you would probably expect given his pedigree. But when I sat down, frantically as I was loading up the invite there, it was very easy for me to go, right, Stevenson's playing, Hanlon's playing, and then it's like, right, okay, who is going to get the nod? Kind of for the same reason we've already mentioned, I would go with Ewan Murray for just a little bit of continuity and a little bit. He's already got a relationship with Kevin Dabrowski this year old, so I would go with that.
It's like your FIFA chemistry. It's
that's it. It's just you've got relationships. They'll need to build up over time anyway. But yeah, a little bit of continuity I think is a good thing. And overall for the whole squad, it's massive that it's not been a big rebuild. I really don't think you can overstate how important that will be. I know, Robbie, you were on the terrace at the start of the week with a Thistle fan. I know, that was organic as well. I did not have that written down. And one of the things that David Forrest, the Thistle fan, was saying was that when they ran so close and then lost out in the playoffs, their team was then really kind of picked apart and they had to rebuild, and there was time from that. And it happened before with Queen's Park, and it happened before that with Arbroath. And it hasn't really happened with us. We actually didn't really lose anybody, really.
Well, that was it. I was saying on that
beyond
podcast,
Kyle Turner.
I was saying on that podcast that like one of the key things that the board have actually done is they've tied down players on sort of longer term deals to sort of mitigate that straight away. So yeah, it's I think that it's very positive stuff from Rovers to have been in that position right from the start. Yeah. Just to turn to yourself, Callum, I mean, there could potentially be a situation where we could actually play a back a back five with two wing backs because Stevenson and Freeman. So I mean, would you go with four at the back, or would you be looking for the wing backs? What would be your preference?
I'd stick to the four. I'd stick to the four at the back.
And how are you feeling about the defence in general? Just I know that I was reading online that Dylan Corr has apparently dislocated his shoulder again at Morton, so I hope that he's back soon. But yeah, just in general, we've obviously got a bit more stability now this season compared to last season. And again, I know that Duncan touched on it, but you've also got the aspect that they are all guys, if not late 20s into early 30s, other than maybe Freeman. Do you think that makes a big difference in terms of stuff like communication, that they'll be a lot more confident in who they are and just where they're at?
Yeah, I think it's a massive upgrade on what we had last season. No offence to, obviously, Dick Watson and... Who did we have it right back again?
Ross
We're not
Milne.
allowed to see his name. It's been deleted.
Oh, sorry.
But yeah, it's like Stevenson and Hanlon are massive for this level. You know, it's like they had Premiership clubs going after them, so for them to come to us is a massive deal for us. And then you have Fordyce, who is one of Edgery's best players, who had a much better defence than we did last season. So having those three will definitely help with this coming season. And of course, Freeman, he's someone else. He is our only right back, I think. Obviously, Ross Matthews can play there, but we'll see how he gets on. I've not had the chance to properly have a look at him.
That's all right. I mean, we know that NK Bravo are playing right now in the the Conference League, so I can understand if your attentions are diverted to a certain Slovenian. I'm gonna come back to you just now, Leslie. Just we then move further forward on the pitch. Now, obviously, in pre-season, we've seen quite impressive displays from both Lewis Gibson and last Saturday, Kai Montague, who I'm still now maintaining, after reviewing the footage, as a unit. Duncan's shaking his head. Yeah, we've obviously had the younger lads come in, particularly in the second half last Saturday, with impressive displays. So do you think that it's a real opportunity potentially for them to come in and stake a claim in the squad and try and sort of show what they're worth, or would you be looking towards the more experienced lads?
Gibson, I think, of the two, is the one I would possibly see starting. I think probably at the base of the midfield, you're maybe more likely to see two of the three of Brown and Byrne and Matthews. I could see Gibson starting. I think he's got that energy, that pace, and that strength. If not, he's absolutely a magnificent asset to come off the bench. I mean, I was saying this in our group chat. You know, if you imagine if you're a defender in another team and you've been trying to deal with Dylan Easton and then Aidan Connolly or Josh Mullen for 70 minutes, you're knackered and you look over and you see Callum Smith and Lewis Gibson getting stripped and ready to come on. Your heart is just going to sink. So I think Gibson is one I might see starting. Montague, I suspect he will make a contribution from the bench. I'm also a bit concerned if he's that size at the age he is. He's going to be like Didier Drogba by the time he's a fully grown man. So there's some frightening things in the year ahead. I see Duncan's doing the dog being taken to the vet face again.
I'm not seeing this. I don't know. I think possibly, and maybe this is a little unkind, but I think he's been standing next to Jake Nicholson in some of these photos, and there's maybe an optical illusion going on. Yeah, he's not. Nah. Listen, he's not a wee guy by any means at all. But I think calling him a unit is a massive exaggeration.
Right. So see, when I said this, I think I've got to put it into context of like, you don't see many 17-year-olds that look like him. In terms of like, I know that Blair's probably going to be sitting there right now on a sun lounger in Tenerife saying, "I work in a school, shut your pass." But here we are. But no, I think that was a very positive performance, in particular from Montague. I know that a lot of people had probably speculated in terms of those two coming into the club as to whether we'd sort of had one eye on the future, but maybe a bit further down the road, whether it's like a couple of seasons. And maybe potentially, for instance, they go out on loan, get a bit of experience, and they come back and we start using them in the first team next season. But I think with the performances they put in, I can understand why any fan is going to be getting excited about those two. And I am here to dish out the propaganda left, right, and centre about them. So, yeah, I think
there's also, sorry, Robbie, there's
Yeah,
also
carry on.
probably a bit of a distinction to be drawn between Lewis Gibson and Kai Montague.
Yeah,
We've
100%.
been kind of putting them in the same bracket because I mean, there's only about a year's difference between them in age, but Kai Montague's been sort of, I think, as far as I'm aware, kind of in and out of that East Kilbride team, and obviously they were going great guns in their league. It's no criticism at all, but it's been Lewis Gibson has had basically 2 full seasons now in League One. So he started 24 games, or certainly played in 20. Started 15 games 2 seasons ago. Started 12 and came off the bench 16 times. So he's played in 50 odd first team games already, and only in the division below at a full time team. I think Lewis Gibson
before that it would have been, was it our level or were they still at League One at that point?
I think League One the last 2. He might have played a bit of cup football the season before that, when they were in the Championship. But he played. I'm not entirely sure, but he's not making a huge step up. He's been in and around first team for a couple of seasons. I think Lewis Gibson is much more of a player for now than certainly like a Kai Montague or a Jake Nicholson, for example. And I think the thing with that is he's 18. So that actually I think is, from a supporter's perspective, I think that's something you're allowed to actually be a bit excited about. That actually signed a guy who's 18, not so that he can come in and do a bit of training and then go out on loan. I think Lewis Gibson's come in to try and take a jersey off of an Aidan Connolly or a Dylan Easton, and good luck to him. I'm looking forward to seeing him try.
Yeah, I think that all very valid points, and yeah, as you say, I've kind of been guilty of that myself, grouping them together. But yeah, I think that you're fair in what you've said there, and as a player, very, very exciting to watch Lewis Gibson. So I'm looking forward to sort of seeing what he can do. Move right up to the forwards now. So it seems to be a bit of a clear-cut decision in terms of the standard formation, in terms of where we're going at the moment. If we're going one up top, then who are we going to be taking? Are we going to be taking Jack Hamilton, or are we looking in terms of Callum Smith? So for you, Callum, what are your thoughts on that one? Who would you be starting out of those two?
Jack Hamilton.
Okay, and any reason in particular that you've gone down that route?
I just feel like he's perfect for playing against the lower league opposition, because lower league opposition, they tend to be a bit more physical. They tend to chuck themselves about a bit more, and Hamilton's a perfect counterweight to that because he does like to get physical with defenders. So he'll just run around, jump around into them, be a chaotic mess for like 60, 70 minutes, and then that'll be when Smith will come on. Yeah,
it's I think that an interesting factor might be as well that you've got the element that there is the bonus point penalties, and Jack Hamilton, it's one thing, you can't level at him. Takes a bloody good penalty. Like we saw that in the playoffs against Partick Thistle, where he absolutely hammered the ball home, and it's probably the most convincing penalty that we had. But hopefully we're not in the need for that position, because I'm hopeful that Jack Hamilton's going to score the goals to get us into the second round of fixtures with 3 points on the board. So Leslie, what would you be looking towards Jack Hamilton, or are you thinking more of the Callum Smith?
I would be looking towards Jack Hamilton, but how I'd want to use him is completely the opposite to the way Callum described. I think there is a lot to Jack Hamilton's game, and I think we have to be really careful this season that we do not just use him as this big lighthouse that we launch balls up towards. That absolutely did my box in last season. He's a great player. Jack Hamilton is very good with the ball at his feet. He's got a reasonable turn of pace. He's good at turning defenders. He's good at bullying defenders. Psychologically, we just seem to do this thing that when we've got a big guy up front, that we just send things up at him. And I would absolutely at all costs try to resist doing that. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are times you need it. There are times you need somebody that can knock the ball down and get it out of the air. And again, we saw that with Hamilton last season. I would absolutely be hoping that in these games we try to do more with Hamilton with the ball at his feet, which means that we're playing, in a sense, not entirely differently to how we might play with Vaughan up there when he's back fit, or with Smith. But no, I think this is absolutely time to try and break out of that idea of using Jack Hamilton as the Bass Rock lighthouse, or as that big mobile floating lighthouse that they used to have at Anstruther, and actually do things with him, with the ball at his feet.
Yeah, it's. I know that that's been, again, a common sentiment that's been shared, and one that I've sort of subscribed myself, that I hope that, because Jack Hamilton as a player, he's had that best spell when he was with Arbroath, when he was free scoring for them, and I think their fans were always of the consensus that, like, if you can get him into that 6-yard box, or just about the penalty spot, and you can get the ball into him, then he's absolutely lethal. So, yeah, if we can get them off the mark and get him a few goals under his belt, I'm fully of the belief that Jack Hamilton can kick on and have a really good season. And I do, much like Brian Graham, I think that he can step up to the plate much in the same way that Brian Graham did, really, in his second season with us compared to his first. I know that he had that spell, that run towards the end of his first season, Brian Graham. But yeah, it was really in the second season that he took off, and I'm very hopeful that if Jack Hamilton gets up and running, that he can cause some real serious damage to teams in this league, and again in the League Cup as well. Duncan, I know that you're a huge Callum Smith fan, very big enthusiast for him, much like myself. Would you be looking for Callum Smith to lead the line to start with, or are you joining the team Jack Hamilton for this podcast?
No, actually, almost on sort of autopilot. I'd written down Jack Hamilton, but then Leslie and Callum picked him, so I changed my mind. Yeah, just to be contrary. But no, to be fair, I think it is up for grabs. I've said that a lot with these team selections. I think it's a bit of a coin toss. You can make a case, either way. And again, I'm not going to be taking the huff at 2:00 when the team lines come out if it's Callum Smith or Jack Hamilton. Yeah. I don't know who I would be taking out my midfield. I'd quite like to see them both up front, to be fair. I know it's, typically I'm welded to that 4-2-3-1, but if you're ever going to be playing two strikers, maybe it's, a League Cup group game against a side in League Two. But even if it is the one forward, I think Callum Smith has a lot of quality. He's a very, very good finisher. I think he scored, at least 2 in last season's League Cup? Once in the group stage and once at Easter Road.
At Easter Road, I should say.
So maybe it's a competition he likes. Maybe that's enough to tip the balance and kind of give him the nod. But again, to go back to a couple of points that you just made, I think that point you've made there about Jack Hamilton being in his second season, I think is very astute. I think that's something that, again, is a big advantage. It's he's had time to settle in. The other players, basically everybody who's going to be anywhere close to him in the park has been around them for a year now as well. They've all settled in. Hopefully you do get a little bit more time to drill into players that, look, you don't need to just be launching it long just because he's over 6 foot. Calm down. I think you've also got the benefit of, in Callum Fordyce and Paul Hanlon, with the greatest of respect, these are better footballers than Keith Watson. Mm-hmm. Keith Watson's a tremendous defender. I really loved Keith Watson, and one of his big advantages was you knew what he was going to do with the ball, which was just kick it in the direction he was facing. But that's how you get into the situation of Jack Hamilton spends his afternoon, just having to rattle into folk to try and win headers. Yeah. Whereas, even just a couple of extra bodies in the defence who are just a little bit calmer, a little bit more prepared to play their passes, hopefully over the course of the season, we'll get a little bit more of a nuanced game for the likes of Jack Hamilton to play. But on Saturday, on the basis of the game against Inverness even, I thought Callum Smith looked pretty bright. Cali were getting weaker as the game went on, but I thought we finished quite strongly. So, I'm going to go Callum Smith.
Yeah, I think you can look at either of them, but I think it's a very valid point about last season's squad, and particularly with Keith Watson. And again, I was I thought Keith Watson was very, very good at defending, but the main issue when he was playing for me was much like you say. And me and my friend, who I go to the games with usually, is we've sort of termed it as back from McGlynn's first spell when we had Willie Dyer playing at left back, and every so often the ball would get rolled out to him and a winger would be charging him down, and he did what we then became to enthusiastically know as the Willie Dyer panic pass, which would be a long ball up the pitch, which usually inevitably goes out of play. And he was better with the ball at his feet and going and attacking, but there was always that element of that he would shank one out every so often and we'd be like, there's that Willie Dyer panic pass. It felt very much the same for Keith Watson, going in terms of the ball being at the back and it would go long, which inevitably does not lend itself well to the style that you want to be seeing in terms of getting the ball on the feet to Jack Hamilton. So, yeah, I think that's a very fair comment. So, I'm just going to check. Duncan, did you get a chance to prepare a starting 11 at all? Just for
Yes, I do have a hastily scribbled 11 here.
Let's hear it then.
So I think I gave them a defence. So, obviously, Kevin Dubrovsky, I said Stevenson and Hanlon. I think, to be fair, you're going to hear this a lot from me this season. I think that's going to be the left-hand side of your defence every single game. Unless you have an injury or a suspension, that's going to be who I want on the left-hand side of my defence. I've gone Ewan Murray over Callum Fordyce purely for the fact that it's one less new guy to kind of have to get up to speed. But I would almost certainly on that basis then have Callum Fordyce in for the next game. Kieran Freeman at right back. I've got Sean Byrne and Scott Brown at the base of my midfield, with apologies to Ross Matthews. Dylan Easton wide left, Sam Stanton as the 10, Josh Mullen wide right, and Callum Smith up front.
Okay, and Leslie, you next.
I have got Dubrovsky in goals. I've got Stevenson at left back. I've then got Hanlon and Fordyce in the middle, Freeman on the right, Brown and Byrne on the base. I've got Gibson starting on the left. I've got Mullen on the right, Stanton in the 10, and Hamilton up top.
It's interesting going with Fordyce at the back. So yeah, it's definitely an option there. And Callum, how about you?
Same as Les, but Easton on the left.
All right, fair enough. And I noticed as well, everyone except for me has opted to get Sean Byrne into that midfield. So I went with Kev at the back in a 4-2-3-1 with Stevenson and Hanlon, Murray and Freeman at the back. So exactly the same defence as you, Duncan.
Yep.
I had Scott Brown in with Ross Matthews, just simply because I know that Sean Byrne took a bit of a dull one at the end of or midway through the Calais game, so I figured if you get him the opportunity to rest up. Stanton is your number 10 with Dylan Easton and Lewis Gibson in there, because I'd like to see Lewis Gibson in from the start. Just again, he's played against teams of this calibre before, last season and the season before that, so there's no reason why you can't use that as an opportunity to really offer him the chance to kick on and show him that he's got that chance there to play first team football. And Jack Hamilton up top for me. So that was the starting 11 that I've gone for. Prediction time. So for the start of this season, Duncan, what are you making for your prediction?
I think I'm still... Listen, I suppose we're not used to seeing this Rovers team blow teams away, are we? Based on the evidence of last season. So I'm going to say 2-0, but a very comfortable 2-0, a very kind of measured, keep them at arm's length, 2-0.
I would happily take that all day. Les?
I am going for 2-1. I think Stirling are going to score early, with this being our first competitive game and a number of new defenders, but then I think we will ease our way back into it and we'll win 2-1. With it being quite comfortable in the end.
And Callum?
I do think it... same as Les, I think it might be 2-1, but the thing is, with Stirling, they've been a bit of a bogey team for us. I remember when we used to be in the old Division 2 with them a good while ago, like a decade ago. We struggled to beat them. I think last time we played them in the League Cup, which was maybe 2 seasons. Oh, actually, no, it would be 3 seasons now. Actually, I think it was 3 seasons ago where we had them in this group stage, and we lost to them on penalties. they are a bit of a bogey team, but I do think this will be like 2-1, 3-1, something like that.
Yeah, I remember that I don't think we'd actually. I don't know if it was our first ever win. This might be one for you, Duncan, but it was our first ever win that game with Stevie Hislop, where he broke through to put us in the lead on that old second division title. Jumped into the crowd to celebrate with his dad.
I remember the goal. I don't know if that was our first ever win, but
It won't have been, because there was a game where Stevie Bonner scored. I remember that, where we won that one. But I remember that it had been a good while since we'd won at Forth Bank, or we just generally didn't have that much luck there.
We have won very recently at Forth Bank, but weirdly enough, the opposition were not Stirling Albion. During the COVID season,
University?
Correct. We beat Stirling Uni at Forth Bank in the Cup in one of the COVID seasons. I remember that because that was one of Timmy Abraham's first game, and that's the first time where you got to see some 19-year-old business management student grazing Timmy Abraham and him launching himself at the deck and then jumping up raging as if he'd been shot or something.
I'm going to question that. I don't think it was Stirling Uni. And Duncan's looking confused.
No, I was thinking about something else.
Right. I think it was actually
wandering.
Stirling Albion. I'm sure it was actually just Stirling Albion, because if it was Stirling Uni, that's the type of thing I would remember, because I went to uni there.
I think you're right. I think what it is Stirling Uni did the TV coverage, and they did it really, really well because it was their media studies students. But you're right, it may have been Stirling Albion.
Gozi scored,
because
I checked it, because it was the last game that we played at Forth. This is the level of research that we're doing for our podcast, by the way, right now. Gozi Igwe and Dylan Tate, I think, scored. It was a Scottish Cup game, I'm sure. Back in
that. I mean, in terms of when I think about Forth Bank, I'll just think of it was the one and only good game that Barry Mackay had.
Aye,
because it was like the 1 week that he wasn't asked to track back, and he looked unbelievable, and then just went back to being terrible again. Because as it turned out, we didn't have 80% possession every week.
There's a few games that stand out, just talking about Forth Bank and playing there for me. I remember the chunks of the playoff game where we lost 3-1 and Brian Fairbairn scored to give us hope that we were on the cusp of something great, and then Stirling got a daft penalty from a player that I look at the name and I have no recollection of who it actually was. And usually I'm alright with that sort of stuff, but this guy I think he's got the surname Neil, and I just completely erased out of my memory. I do remember a game where Robert Sloan scored from a corner as well there. Once, I think it was horrific conditions. And then a couple of games that really stand out were the Stevie Hislop one where he scored, because Kevin Smith did his cruciate, I think, that day. And then the game after that I remember was John Baird scoring late on in the season. We went against Dunfermline for the old First Division title. I took my old flatmate from France along, who'd never been to a game. He'd heard loads about Rovers from me, but then very enthusiastic to find that it was a stand full of Raith fans, and he could not believe that there was more away fans than home fans. Just kept going, this would not happen in France. It just would not happen in France. He couldn't believe it, just because of the geographical distances that are involved there. So, aye.
Forth Bank's also the only ground I've ever turned up at to find out that the game's been called off.
I do not miss that in the slightest. Pre-smartphone radio coverage days of for all people gripe about smartphones nowadays.
To be fair, I mean, even at that, it must have been a late kickoff, because I'm pretty sure I was living in Stirling at the time, and I still got to the ground to find that it had been called off.
Yeah, me and my mate pulled into the car park, and it's just not enjoyable. Anyway, shall we have a game of Should McStay or Should Dargo?
Yes, I think we should.
Excellent. Okay, so just the basic premise: 6 Rovers-related former or current players in terms of trivia, 6 points, and I'll basically run through them, and each time you all get a guess as to who you are going for. So kick us off. I am a midfielder. And do we have any opening bids?
Yes, I am going to go for the last Englishman to play for Raith Rovers, Blaze Riley Snow.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'm going to go for Paquito.
I'm going to go for Nat Wedderburn.
Okay.
the third or fourth most recent Englishman to play for Raith Rovers, according to my very sketchy research.
I made 13 appearances for the club. That's clue number 2. So a midfielder who's made 13 appearances.
So you're talking about maybe an injury hit half season, possibly. I am going to go for John Heron.
John Heron.
I literally just wrote that exact thing down on my bit of paper.
All right.
I don't know what the opposite of what the opposite of great minds is, Les, but I think we might have hit it.
You sticking with
Rudy
that, Liz?
Scatchell a midfielder?
If you
I
want
would
him to
give
be.
you Rudy Scatchell as a midfielder, yeah.
I'll go with him.
And Les, are you sticking with John Heron?
I will, yes.
Cool. I've scored against Raith for 2 of my former clubs, but never for Raith.
That doesn't have very Heron-y vibes to me.
Mm-hmm.
I will change to Kevin McBride.
Any further bids from the latter 2?
Grant Gillespie. My favourite ported midfielder.
Just while Leslie's thinking, just as an update, Ayr are playing Kilmarnock in a friendly tonight, and their 2 goals have been scored by Marco Roos and George Stanger. So both of your horrible draft teams are coming to fruition in the Ayrshire Derby tonight.
Right, I'm going for...
Scores put up entry.
Ayr has jogged my memory a wee bit, and I've remembered there are more midfielders in Raith Rovers history than Ross Matthews and Dylan Teat. And I'm going with Eddie Malone.
Eddie Malone.
Can't even remember if he was a midfielder, but I'm going with Eddie Malone.
Clue number 4, so just to recap, they're a midfielder, 13 appearances, they've scored against Raith for 2 of their former clubs, but they've never scored for Raith. My dad was a former player in Scotland, but didn't play for Raith.
So, I think to get a bit kind of meta-gamey with this, I think that brings it right up to date. Because I don't think Robbie would say that for a player who's quite old. You know, if it was a guy from like the 90s or the early 2000s, I don't think Robbie would be like, oh, his dad also played. So I think we're getting closer.
You with your 90 backgammon over there.
Yeah. That's all I've got. I mean, I'm just killing for time while I try and remember players who aren't Dylan Tate or Ross Matthews.
I have no idea. Did Grant Gillespie's dad play for Scotland?
He did, according to Dario Valenti.
That's a good enough source for me.
Sticking with Gillespie?
Yes.
Okay.
My mind just turned to total mince here. Now, I said this to you guys before we started recording last week, but you know that thing that happens in your brain where you've signed a player for a club in Championship Manager or Football Manager, and you get so into the save you forget it didn't happen in real life. Because I signed Martin Bavage out of spite for the Rovers in Championship Manager 0304.
We've not signed the son.
Yeah, exactly. Thank God we've not signed his son. I also then was about to put down Kieran Ngwenya, but I remembered his dad wasn't a footballer. His dad taught me at uni. So my brain is just total mince. So I'm sticking with Eddie Malone.
Eddie Malone. Duncan?
No, I was trying to think there. I was like, I was reading about someone recently whose dad was a football player, and I know that could be anybody. And I've just realised it was Dylan Corr. His dad was a goalie, but Dylan Corr famously not a midfielder. So I wasted quite a lot of that thinking time there, and I think I'm going to need the next clue. I'll stick with Kevin McBride and his unknown father to me.
I've travelled over Scotland from Stranraer to Dingwall.
Okay.
I am going for João Pereira Vitória.
Did his dad play in Scotland?
I don't know. I just can't think of any other players that exist.
I love how, Leslie, you were so composed on answers about Korean translations for Raith Rovers on the last episode. Like, so focused. And now it's like a complete panic-stricken.
Yeah, that was a real U-turn there. When you went, I've got it, I was like, oh, he's definitely got that. I don't know who this will be, but I bet it makes sense straight away. And yeah, I'm yet to be convinced by that one.
So
although actually, to be fair,
Ross Callahan?
other than the played in his dad one, the rest actually could add up for João Victoria. So maybe I've been too glib too soon, Les. Right, Dingwall and Stranraer.
So, midfielder, 13 appearances, scored against Raith for 2 of my former clubs, but never for Rovers. My dad was a former player in Scotland, and I've travelled over Scotland from Stranraer to Dingwall.
Nah, I'm just going to go back to Grant Gillespie. It's not Ross Callahan. I forgot about some of the previous clues.
Just trying to think of Rovers players who've also played for Stranraer. And I'm not getting very many.
Could have played against Stranraer. I don't know.
What Rovers players have also played for Ross County? We really do need like background music or something for this.
Ben Williamson.
I take it the last clue like just really gives it away.
I'm hoping it does.
Okay, hang on. Give me another couple of minutes then. Ross County. A midfielder.
Now, at this moment, just while Duncan's thinking away, I want to personally take the time to thank everyone on Pie and Bovril that gave us the feedback about the podcast and what they said. I think we've tried a few new different things over the summer, bringing in sort of quiz episodes to sort of kill the time, a few interviews as well that are lined up for the future. And also as well, there was a bit of feedback that people can't find the time to listen to a podcast that is over an hour long. Now, I do appreciate that this doesn't help, but here we are. So I'm sorry to everyone that had gripes about that on Pine Bovril. But no, in all seriousness, the feedback is very welcome. And I appreciate everyone that listens. And I know that was some really good feedback there in terms of people that just listen, because it's sort of like almost like, if you're outside of Kirkcaldy, maybe far away, people like Bob the Pleasure, for example, who's down in Somerset, it gives you a chance to rekindle and listen back into the club. So, yeah, thank you for all the lovely feedback.
You could take out a lot of this thinking time and get this episode back under an hour again.
I could. But
just
thank
like cut out bits about me like yelling out João Pereira Vitória's name at random.
Do you want the
this could be
final
its
clue?
own separate episode.
Yeah, you'll need to give us this extra episode.
Right. So, a midfielder.
Clue.
Yeah.
Sorry. My brain is just mince at this point.
That's all right. A midfielder who made 13 appearances. They've scored against Rovers for 2 of their former clubs, but never for us. Their dad was a former player in Scotland. He's travelled over Scotland from Stranraer to Dingwall. He's not long left the Rovers, but he still fucking hates the Pars.
Oh no, fucking hang on.
Who played midfield for us last season?
Sorry for the language there. Oh,
I can see the light
Kyle
bulb.
Turner.
Congratulations, Duncan. You have won.
Who's Kyle Turner's dad?
Tommy Turner.
Tommy Turner.
Used to play for St Mirren.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But yeah, you were very close, Leslie, actually, with João Vitória. That was the closest anyone actually got, because he was at Stranraer at the same time as Kyle Turner, and he scored in a game where they won 3-2 when we were back in League One. But yeah, that was... congratulations to Duncan. I know that was...
Yeah,
that there.
Feels like a bit of a hollow victory, to be fair. I mean, we didn't get quite to the point where Graham was humming players' initials, but... Yeah, I think that's that. Hopefully, at least a couple of people at home managed to get that one a little bit quicker than we did there.
I have to say, I'm really glad that I didn't have my Kyle Turner top hanging behind me, the signed one from the Louis Vaughan testimonial. That would have just been absolutely hilarious. Me sitting there trying to get the guy's name and it's like hanging over my shoulder.
I should add, Leslie, you also came the furthest away as well, because Eddie Malone is a left back. He's... wouldn't have classified him as a midfielder. So also you got simultaneously the closest and the furthest away. But no.
But well done for guessing Eddie Malone in Blair's absence, just to keep up the run of Eddie Malone appearing in every edition of this game.
Once again, Blair here in spirit. I know that we were talking earlier, shaking his head about me, but also shouting Eddie Malone, no doubt, on a sunbed in Tenerife, having a great time. So yeah. Again, just to thank everyone for taking the time to listen to this evening. I hope that everyone gets along to Fourth Bank. I know that we've sold over 300 tickets. The club had announced recently, and we've also hit the 2,000 mark in season tickets, which is great to see. As ever, we will likely be back at the weekend with a debrief for this episode and a look ahead to the Stranraer game. On the social media side, we're present on Twitter, Instagram, and we've also got the Etsy shop. And just a point on the Etsy shop, we are going to be using some of the money that's came through as a result of the stuff that's been there, and we're in talks about sponsoring a player, which we're going to be looking to announce, hopefully one of those lovely new away jerseys very shortly. So keep an eye out for that. We'll have that no doubt in the socials when that comes to fruition, hopefully very soon. But yeah, once again, thanks a lot for taking the time to listen, and we will see you again very, very soon. So bye for now.